Well, David, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate you being here.
Stephen, I thank you for the invitation. And, my God, we'll be self-disclosing here. We miss you totally because you used to work with me very closely in a lot of the development of my business, several years ago. So, so hi,
Hi.
delighted to help out here and contribute if I can.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. I'll just say from my personal experience, David and his wife, Catherine, are two of the most amazing people I know. And like David mentioned, early on in my career, I had the opportunity to work closely with David, and the impact has been just unbelievable. So thank you, David. And yeah, anyways, so grateful that you're here today. One question I want to start with. So, David, I know you are in Amsterdam right now, but I know that you were born and raised in the South in the United States. How did that all happen to end up in Amsterdam today?
Well, can we do about an 18-hour podcast?
Yeah.
That might cover the story, but quick version of it. I kind of wanted to get out of the South and wanted to get into a more sophisticated, conscious environment than I grew up in the 50s and 60s in the South, and so went to a radical, no grades, design your own education, little college in Florida, New College at Sarasota. And then graduated from there, got into graduate school in American intellectual history, studying history of culture, history of thought, or whatever. Very cool stuff as far as I was concerned. And this is Berkeley, 1968. So you can imagine, heady time to be there. Discovered that I wanted my own enlightenment and that the graduate school didn't seem to be the source of that. So I dropped out and then went on to a lot of self-exploration stuff. In terms of how do I grow myself? Who am I? Why am I here? What about that? And I'd had a lot of inner experiences that were quite powerful and substantial in terms of my awareness of, wow, there's a whole lot more here that I don't know about and that's available to us that we can't see. So how do I explore that? So I went on that journey that included getting a black belt in the martial arts, whatever, but I still had to pay the rent. So wound up having to, so I took jobs and then it wound up in people in my network at that time. There were some of those that kind of knew what they wanted to do. Wasn't particularly materialistic or aspirational or entrepreneurial. I was more into self exploration, but just trying to pay the rent. But I liked cool jobs and liked to do fun stuff. So I wound up being a good number two guy for a number of friends of mine who were starting their own businesses, and so I just wound up helping a lot of them do what they were doing. So I wound up showing up and going, how much easier can we do this? Because as you know, Stephen, I'm the laziest guy you ever met. Wait a minute, there's got to be some easier way we can do this without having to do these 14 things. How can we do just two and make that work? So now they call that process improvement. Back then, I would just call, how can I leave work earlier? So I wound up being a good number two guy, but I go in and help them improve their process, and then I get bored. And I go, okay, let me go find another gig. Then I discovered they pay people to do that. They call them something, consultant. Duh. Okay. So it's like, okay, well, let me take a risk, jump off the pier, hung out my shingle, Allen Associates, 1981, 82, and I created my little consulting business. But then, because I love free space, I love the clarity that martial arts and spiritual practices, meditation gave to me. I said, but wait a minute, my life is getting more complex. Is there a way to keep that? And then I wound up, especially in my exploration of sort of consulting models. I didn't know much about it. Quite honestly, Stephen, I do not have any formal traditional education in time management and business or psychology. So I was exploring, okay, what are the models I can use? If I'm going to walk in and help somebody with their business, it'd be nice to be able to, if I wasn't clear what to do, pull out some model out of my pocket that I could use to help them do that. So I got kind of hungry for good models that worked for anybody, no matter where they were or what they were doing, that would help improve their situation and bring clarity and focus and control into their situation. So I had a couple of great mentors about that. Long story short, I wound up creating a good model about this, which was the early days of what then became getting things done in the GTD methodology, about capturing, clarifying, organizing, and reflecting on stuff. but I discovered some of that stuff for myself first. And it's like, wow, that's great. Turned around, started to use that with my clients, and it worked the same thing for them. So, wow, that's really cool. So, it created more control, more focus, more stability, more space to focus on meaningful stuff. And then heavyweight guy in the corporate training world, head of HR in a big corporation, showed up and said, "Gee, David, we need that in a whole culture. Can you design something around what you've come up with that we could train a lot of people with instead of one-on-one?" So I said, okay. So we designed something. It was quite successful. 1983, 84, did major programs for Lockheed in California. So then I didn't even know what I'd come up with. I thought everybody should already know this already. It was like, duh, not yet. And so just by referral based, wound up over the next 20 years, going from corporation to corporation, bringing the training model I'd come up with and implementing that all over the place. And also my consulting turned into coaching for senior people in these organizations that wanted hand-holding desk side to help them implement what this methodology was that I'd come up with. And so after thousands of hours and hundreds of thousands of people going through this stuff, at some point I had some good friends say, "David, you ought to write the book." I'm like, "Write the book? Oh my God. What do you mean write the book?" I said, "Well, you've come up with this." And by that time, after 20, 25 years, I finally discovered what it is I'd uncovered and that it was unique and nobody had been able to punch a hole in it. And so I said, I guess I should write the manual in case I got run over by a bus. At least what I'd uncovered in the last 25 years, we could get captured into some sort of a methodology and some sort of a coherent model. So that's when I took the 4 years to write Getting Things Done, from 97 to 2001 when it was published. And then that threw us into a whole different arena because I had no idea how popular it would be, whether anybody would care about it, whether they would buy it, because it was pretty noisy at that time in terms of time management stuff. But it hit a nerve and became a bestseller and got international, got translated into 20 plus languages. And then the world kept coming at us, going, "Wow, we need this. Can I be a GTD consultant? Can I, get?" And we never did any marketing. GTD was our shorthand for the book. And then people were suddenly going, "Wow, can I do GTD? Can I be a GTD practitioner?" Whatever. So then we said, "Whew, shall we do this international stuff?" Because my book became a bestseller. I could have just done the individual, keynote speaking and not have an organization around this. But I said, "God, this is such great stuff. And I'm not a ta-da kind of person. I'd rather have this methodology out there in some distributable way that just keeps informing people about how to improve their conditions, in some sort of sustainable global model out there." But I didn't know how to do that. So then, of course, your uncle showed up and said, "Wow, David, we know how to do that. We know how to build a global international licensing model for what you've come up with, as a model." And so then, this has got to be at least 10 years ago. I don't know, Stephen, when you came on board with, whatever we were doing, but back at that point, we said, okay, let's try to make this work, because I didn't know how to do that. It was much bigger gum than I knew how to chew. So building a model of licensing what I'd come up with as a methodology, be able to monitor that so we didn't lose the quality of it. That was a big game. So the last 10 to 12 years we've been using to try to figure out and then focus on building a sustainable model about how to take the methodology I came up with that's basically laid out in the book, Getting Things Done, and then build a global licensing and international network of people that are doing that and doing training and coaching that we've certified to be able to do that. So there's a very short version of a very long story, Stephen, as you can imagine. Yeah.
Here's a question: getting into when I introduce GTD or Getting Things Done to someone who has never heard about it before, I think the initial impression people think and sometimes get is like, okay, Getting Things Done. It's a book about being more productive. It's probably some kind of system I can implement. There's probably some cool tips and tricks in that book that'll help me. But something you always say that I love is you say getting things done is actually, ironically, not really about getting things done. Could you maybe talk a little bit about what you mean what you mean when you say that.
Yeah. I mean, getting things done, the methodology is about being appropriately engaged with your life. Are you appropriately engaged with your cat? Are you appropriately engaged with your boss? Are you appropriately engaged with your career and your future? Are you appropriately engaged with your spouse? Are you appropriately engaged with your dishwasher? Whatever it is that happens to have your attention, the reason it has your attention is you're not yet appropriately engaged with it. That's not a negative thing. That's just a signal. It says, wait a minute, there's something I need to capture and decide about that, organize some reminder about what to do about that, if anything, and put it in the right place that I trust, and I'll see it at the right time. So then dishwasher is off my mind. Cat food is off my mind. Career is off my mind. So it's really about how do I get clear and present about anything? And it may indeed include getting a whole lot of stuff done, because this methodology actually produces the ability to when you say, how do I be successful? Successful at what? Productive at what? You go on a vacation to relax and you don't relax. That's an unproductive vacation. And, productivity, Stephen, as you know, has got a lot of baggage around it called work harder, sweat harder, work more hours, da, 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 da. So indeed, it might mean that if those kinds of things show up as the appropriate things you need to do to then clear your mind and to stay focused and present on what you're doing. So if your audience, whoever is listening or watching this, or of the younger set, they're not so much interested in what they're going to do after retirement. They're interested in how to get to where they want to go, right? So understanding, okay, where do you want to go? What does that mean? What does success mean? What would it look like 5 years from now if you were totally successful career-wise, lifestyle-wise? Describe your scene. So that's part of getting things done is understanding, well, wait a minute, what are the outcomes that we have, that are current and inherent in what we're thinking about and what's got our goat right now? And then what are the action steps I need to take? But that's a thought process that doesn't show up automatically. You actually have to train yourself for the thought process. So getting things done, and what I came up with, one of the ways we describe that to a lot of our corporate clients is it's an installed thought process. What if you never started a meeting without going, what exactly are we trying to accomplish by what time today? How many people listening or watching this have ever been that, have ever said that, or ever heard that in any meeting you've ever been in? You could count them on less than a hand, right?
Right.
And yet, how critical are those questions and the answers to those questions critical in order to have a productive or successful meeting? Right? So we just uncovered the algorithm or the formula about once you've got stuff that has your attention, how do you apply a thought process to it? Is it actionable? Yes or no? And if it is, what's the next action? And if one action won't finish it, what's the project you need to keep track of? Step 3 is, how do you organize reminders of those if you can't finish them in the moment, so that some part of your brain can relax? Okay, now I've decided about what we need to do about hiring the VP. Here's the next step I've got it on my list of action to take at the right time to talk to my assistant to set a meeting. And I've got the outcome, collected on my project list called hire VP, right? Now I sleep with nothing on my mind about that. It's not finished, but I've now appropriately engaged with it. So maybe a longer answer than what you were poking me at, but that is the answer.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I think for me, the biggest paradigm shift that I had with GTD it's happened in the last couple years, is this idea of being able to be totally present and engaged with whatever I'm doing. And that's when I had like an aha moment a few years ago where I was like, this is what David's talking about. Because it's great to have a system to get everything out of your head and do a trusted system, but the purpose of it and why you're really doing that is so that you can be totally present in the moment. And I think for me, I've got young kids, and that's one reason I love GTD is I can be totally present with them, and I'm not having to worry about emails. I'm not having to worry about projects, everything, because I know everything's in a trusted system. And that to me, we talk a lot about paradigm shifts on this podcast. That to me is one of the big paradigm shifts and why I think GTD is such a unique methodology among the, time management, productivity stuff. I mean, there's so many things out there about it, but that's why I think one of the big reasons why yours is different from others is it's got that, just what we've talked about. It's powerful.
Well, Stephen, you're an athletic guy. Got a favorite sports team? You like soccer? You like
I like NBA,
whatever.
college football,
Yeah,
soccer.
right.
Yeah.
So think about these guys when they get onto the field. A soccer player, when they get on the field, what are the two things? What's most on their mind? What are the two things most on their mind once the bell rings, once the ball is out and in play? What are the two things on their mind? The major things are on their mind. Number one, where's the goal? Number two, where's the next play? Or what's the next play? Right. So outcome and action become a core element. That's true on a basketball field. It's on a football field. It's on a soccer field. It's on anywhere. Excuse me. And by the way, do you think they haven't practiced or trained with any kind of methodology before that game whistle blows? Or do you think they've been practicing lots of different, clarifications of models? Once this goes here, here's how we play, and here's what we do. So it's not over-structuring, but creating a structure that allows you the freedom to just focus on goal and action. Right? So I may have said a mouthful, but that really is something you don't get when you just get a time management book or a training about or whatever. It's a thought process that's built into that, but it's not hard to do. Everybody kind of doing it automatically. This is not like a foreign language or new technology you need to learn. You just need to decide, wait a minute, where are we going? What's the next step? How do I organize reminders of that, put them in the appropriate places? It lets my head be clear so I can cook spaghetti, tuck my kids into bed, with just my loving and presence without worrying about the meeting I had and the meeting coming up.
Right. Yeah. It's so powerful. Another thing you told me one time, David, that I loved, and I don't know if you'd add anything to this. You mentioned to me one time that GTD is the principled centered approach to achieving control and focus, and space. Which maybe is another way to describe that as well. But that to me is powerful because again, on this podcast, we really try and focus on paradigms and principles, things that are timeless, will kind of last forever. And that's why I'm very selective with who we have on the podcast. I don't want to just have random people on here. I want things that are principle based. And I think that's the power of GTD is you've uncovered kind of this, I don't know if framework is the right word to describe it, but anyways, it's powerful stuff. So you've talked a little bit about it, about kind of when you look into the GTD, if you Google GTD, one of the first thing that popped up is kind of the 5 steps to mastering workflow. These are kind of the 5 key steps. You've mentioned a few of them, but I'm wondering if you could maybe go through the 5 steps and just like 20, 30 seconds on each one, and
Sure.
Maybe an example of what that looks like. That, and again, the purpose of this is I don't want to give someone an expansive, like this is every dive in the details of GTD. Just give them the bigger picture of what this can do for them, and then obviously love to hear you describe, these 5 steps.
Sure. Well, the 5 steps are capture, clarify, organize, reflect, engage. So let me back up. Capture. What's on your mind right now? Anybody listening or watching this right now, if you have a pen and paper close to you or some sort of recording device, just take the next 30 seconds and write down what most has your attention right now. What's most on your mind? Oh, I need to, that reminds me, we've got to figure out whatever, right? So capture that. The capture step is first, which is what most people's to-do list, if they have a to-do list at all, they kind of look like that. I need cat food. I need to hire a vice president. What most people haven't written down things like, should I get a divorce? Or, should I need to review my whole investment, portfolio. Most people haven't written those things down, though they'll wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking about that. So capturing all of that, capture step is just identifying the things that actually have our attention. They have our attention because they're not on cruise control. We're not yet appropriately engaged with whatever those commitments are that we have. The commitment may not be to finish that, may not be to get a divorce, may be to look into whether we should. So just clarifying those kinds of things, that's the first step. Can be pretty subtle, by the way, as I just indicated. And then you need to decide, okay, once I wrote all that down, and that takes most mid to senior professionals that we've coached over the years, it takes 1 to 6 hours just to collect that inventory. All the things that are open loops that they've committed that are not closed yet, that they still are hanging out there, they're still banging on their brain, called I need to, would, could, should, ought to deal with. So anyway, that's the first step, is capture step. Second step then is to then, okay, once you have that big list, what are you going to do with each one of those things? And then you need to go through a very critical and important next process, which is decide, is that reference? Is that trash? Is that something you're actually going to do something about? And if it's the latter, if it is something you're going to do something about, what doing look like? What's the next action on it? And will one action not finish this? And great. If not, then what's the project that you need to keep track of until it's done? So then that's clarifying the outcome and action, embedded stuff in the things that have people's attention. Step 3 is to make sure you've organized some reminders of the project you came up with and the action step you came up with, and you couldn't finish them in the moment. So that's having some sort of trusted external system, because your brain just sucks as an office. Your brain's a crappy office. About 4 things is all the cognitive scientists have basically proven that you can keep in your mind, and then not just be driven by latest and loudest, because your brain didn't evolve to do that. It didn't evolve to remember, remind. It evolved to do some cool stuff, which is look around your environment, notice things, use long-term history, and then make decisions about, wow, that's a tiger over there, the rain's coming, I need to do whatever. Your brain does that very well. But you go to the store for lemons and you come back with no lemons, 6 things and no lemons. What happened? You tried to use your brain as an office. It sucks as an office. So the whole idea is that capturing stuff, getting out of those your head, making appropriate decisions about what to do. Step 3, organizing the results in some trusted place like a calendar or a to-do list or whatever. And then step 4, making sure you look at your calendar, making sure you look at your errands list, make sure you look at your grocery list. So then step 5, when you engage, you then decide to put your attention or your focus on one particular thing, you've already looked at all the rest and said, that's it. So you're present to do that with full attention and focus. So there's a short version of, as you know, a lifelong craft.
It is. And on the surface, it appears to be very simple. But as you have more experience with GTD, there's depths beyond depths with this stuff. And that's what I love about it. That's what I think signifies that this is a timeless methodology. It's on the surface, it is simple, and you can start implementing this today. But over the years, you just get deeper and deeper insights and become more and more efficient. And I know you say it, David, that you haven't even fully mastered this yet. You're still learning. You're still.
Well, how good can you be at it? Well, come on. How good of a parent can you be, Stephen?
That's
How good
question.
of a soccer player can you be? How good a spaghetti cooker can you be? How good a flute player can you be? Do you think there's any end to any of that for anybody? No. So how good of mastering the flow of life's work and how you engage with that? How good do you think there's any end to that, where at some point you go, I've got it? I don't think so. Yeah, it's an art, it's a craft. Most people work, but they don't understand how they work and what the art and craft of work is. And that's what I figured out. It's the art and craft of work. Work meaning, what do you want to get done that's not done yet? I want to be able to play the flute well. Great. What's the next step? I want to be able to cook spaghetti even better and better. Yay. So what are you going to do? So, it's not about some esoteric big thing. But the truth is that once you sort of catch this idea about that, you start to go, well, what do I need to, how can I get clear this afternoon so I can have nothing on my mind other than spend time with my kids? play ball because he needs to play ball now, or deal with the dog because she needs to be able to get a little engagement with her so she doesn't pee on the carpet. Or wow, what do I need to organize so my thinking at the board meeting, is appropriate given where we're going and what our goals are. So, as you indicated, there's an infinite sublimity and sophistication and detail that can be understood, but they don't show up by themselves. What I just said, those things do not show up because you woke up knowing all those things. You actually have to apply not a hard, but a very specific thought process to those things, and a very specific sort of externalized version of how do I manage a system to maintain, those things appropriately.
Another thing for me when I was first introduced to this methodology was the power of next action thinking. I know you've mentioned it a little bit, but I'd love to hear it from your mouth. This idea of what is next action thinking? How does that empower you? I know for me, when I first kind of got the concept, and it seems like a simple concept and it makes sense, but once I got that concept, it changed my personal work habits.
Well, if you haven't figured out the next physical, visible action you need to take about anything, you haven't finished your thinking. So your mind keeps going, what are you going to do about setting the meeting? What are you going to do about the cat food? What are you going to do about that? What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about that? You got to shut that monkey up. You shut that monkey up by deciding, here's the very, very next thing I need to do. But if you haven't decided whether setting the meeting is sending an email or walking over and talking to somebody, then your brain is not finished yet. And it keeps that open loop spinning in there. So even if you decide to change the next action, well, I thought I was going to send an email, but I think I'll just talk to him when I see him in the hall. That's fine. But you need to make that decision first. Otherwise, your brain keeps spinning. So I just discovered that the next action thinking is what's required in order to stop your brain from spinning about anything. That's simple. You like your brain spinning? And by the way, that's the biggest problem. So I'll address maybe something you want to tackle in some other way. The biggest issue is not overwhelm, it's ambient anxiety. Most people are used to the ambient anxiety that shows up because they haven't finished those decisions about those kinds of things. It's not overwhelm. I used to talk about overwhelm, as you know, Stephen. We used to talk about GTD as the solution for overwhelm. But most people in real overwhelm handle that. Because you can't handle overwhelm very long before you just die or blow up or do something. So most people in real overwhelm, like if suddenly your fire alarm goes off wherever you are right now, you will be essentially overwhelmed with stuff you need to handle, need to decide about, need to whatever, but you deal with that. The real issue is once you're not in the fire in your building, all the demons at the gate come rushing through. Oh my God, Stephen, how many things could you do with your kids right now? What are your neighbors doing with their kids? They're studying Mozart at age 3. They're going to get into Harvard way before your kids are. So how do you feel about that? So the ambient anxiety of essentially infinite opportunity is what's getting most people's goat these days.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
It does. It's deep. I need to process it a little bit, but it's deep stuff. You always have such insightful comments about this stuff. One more thing before we go, we kind of have two questions we always ask every interviewer. But before that, I selfishly want to ask you a question. This is something that I've had a hard time with. I think other people have a hard time with it too. But I struggle with procrastination a lot. So I can be really good about getting everything out of my head written down that I know I have to do. But I struggle sometimes, I think, on the procrastination side and also a little bit on maybe analysis paralysis, where I will just be analyzing things a little too much and not taking action. I think that ties into the procrastination. So I'm genuinely curious and would love to get your insight on procrastination. What have you seen in your work and your experience to help overcome that? What are the roots of it? Just whatever insight you have, I'm really curious.
You spin this around 180 degrees. Why do you think you procrastinate about those things?
I think a lot of it has to do with some kind of negative emotions associated with it.
With what?
With taking some of the actions, because I feel like I know
that they're not right or perfect.
Yeah, I mean that's part of it. What if I take an action and the outcome is not what I want it to be, right? What if I make a call or something that make a sales call or something and I blow it? So that's why I think there's some emotion tied to it. So yeah, I feel like I have the right next action.
Let me stop you right there, because to answer your question, the emotions show up because of your mind, not the other way around. You're thinking the potential negative consequence of an action, right? And how you'd feel about that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I don't want that kind of thing to happen. So, okay, great. So basically all I have to do is have a stiff enough drink or numb yourself out in some other way, and you'll be willing to make that phone call. You'll be willing to take that next step. Why? Because some part of your brain says, okay, I can handle that. I can deal with that. I'm strong enough to deal with the negative consequences or whatever. But is your perfectionism, obviously perfectionism is one of the greatest sources of procrastination. While I can't start on this until I'm sure it's perfect, until I'm sure it's right. Right? So you just answered that. Oh, wow. So then why might you procrastinate about something?
Yeah, fear of failure would be
failure relative to what? Relative to what?
Well,
I'm sorry.
It's all in my. I think, like you said, I think it is.
I'm going to take you deeper here.
Okay,
Stephen, if you're willing to go.
Oh yeah,
I
am. I think fear. Well, that's interesting you say that, because the fear is all in my head of, I guess, my own expectations of, having a successful life. And I think I fear taking some actions because what if it doesn't work out? What if,
by the way, how about what if it did?
Right. Yeah, no, I think I need to change my thought process around it, because I think I do automatically sometimes when I procrastinate go to, like you said, what's interesting is it's in my head that I'm imagining the negative outcomes.
Sure.
And
you freak yourself out. And the smarter and more sophisticated and sensitive you are, the more you'll procrastinate, because the quicker you can create negative phantoms about the possibilities of things being imperfect and the potential consequences thereof. Of course. That's why the people who procrastinate the most sensitive, creative, intelligent people. But for that reason. And the deeper reason would be, wow. And this is where you read Stephen Pressfield, Stephen Pressfield, The War of Art. The thing you'll avoid the most is the thing that will move you closest to your soul. So when I said, what if you were successful? What if you actually did that? What if you had that success? Are you avoiding that? That's a much more subtle and sublime level to think about if you're willing to do that.
Yeah. This is deep, David. I'm going to have a lot to ponder after this call.
Sorry.
No, I love it.
Showed up, so I hope you don't mind.
I don't mind at all, because this is something, for years I've always had a hard time with. I think, this podcast is an example this has been on my mind to do this for years and years. And it was one of those things that it's like, okay, I can't do it
And if
because I
this,
need to.
come on,
Yeah.
Stephen, if this were totally successful and you had all the coolest, wicked coolest people on your podcast, and they started to put you in a place that said, wow, this guy understands sort of uh, the core, timeless principles that need to be embodied for people that want to be successful in their life, in however way they define that. What if you got that bell that that rang you? Hey, Stephen did that. Can you handle that?
I don't know. I hope so.
Would you like to?
Yeah, no, I would like
Oh,
to be.
cool.
Yeah, I would. I think for me, what helped me ultimately kind of start the podcast was is I felt like I had to have my motivations in the right place for it, where I'm genuinely wanting to learn from people like you and other authors. And I've kind of said to myself, regardless of what this outcome is with the podcast, regardless if people listen to this or not, I would have a major regret in my life years down the road if I didn't do this, because it's been on my mind for years. And so I hope it's successful. I do hope it reaches a lot of people. But I think in my mind, I said, you know what, even if it doesn't, I need to do this. I need to do this for myself, because it's just been pressing on me for so many years.
Well, I hope you can handle this. Stephen, you're one of the most integrity-based people I know in my life. I'm so sorry that you weren't, that our business model didn't develop in such a way that we could stay involved with you professionally. And so there are very few people on the planet, and less than a handful, that I would trust to make the kind of decisions you're talking about what's critical, what's universal, what doesn't leak, what holds water in terms of this kind of stuff. Me too. That's why I did what I did, and I've just focused on my particular segment of that behavior set. And so delightful to have somebody like you in that game. So all my best wishes that you keep going with this, because there are very few people, I think, that know how to do that are open to do it, that are willing to do it, and that are still exploring themselves. Interesting. Uh, I just did an interview with Kevin Wilde, who was the chief learning officer at General Mills, several years ago, and big clients of ours, and he was a great champion of our stuff. And he then retired out of General Mills, and then started to studying executive coaching. And one of the things he uncovered was, why did people fail who were high performers, high potential, and then they fell off the rails? He said one thing that was current, that was real for all those, was they started to pay no attention to feedback. It was fascinating to me to hear that. He said everybody after age 30 starts to move into that game, or when they start to graduate in terms of their professional sort of accolades and professional game. So at some point, the one thing, because he said, we used to study all the high performers and how come they got there. He said, I wanted to study the failures. What happened to the people that we identified were high performers and they fell off the rails? And he said that was it. They started to pay no attention to feedback for what they were doing. So
Wow.
I'm not quite sure how that relates to it, but I thought you might be interested in that little piece of data I got, about that. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that either people stay on this game or not. Pay attention. What's showing up? What's got your attention? What are you going to do about that? As opposed to denying it, putting it away, trying to put it to sleep, trying to, whatever. So it's the lifelong learners, but lifelong learners, as you know, Stephen, come on, you're probably old enough now to know that there are only so many lifelong learners at more to mid to senior levels in these organizations that are willing to stay a game in terms of their game and what they're doing. So in the training and development field, it's kind of like, well, they're a big resource, but there are a whole lot of folks that have gone unconscious about this stuff. And so how do we keep them engaged? How do we recognize that? How do they recognize, wait a minute, there's another game they need to play in terms of what they need to do? That makes sense.
It does.
Sorry, I rambled all over the place.
That's really interesting. Like I said, I've got a lot to think about after this episode. So this is great, and I appreciate the kind comments too, David. It means a lot. So to kind of wrap up, there's these two kind of questions I always like to end with. So the first one, I know you've touched on this a little, but if there was one practical action step that a listener could apply today, so that applying the GTD methodology today, they could walk away and do it today, what would be the most impactful step in your mind?
Two things. Get everything out of your head that has your attention and review it regularly on a weekly basis.
Simple, but powerful. And then the last thing is, and I know we've talked a little bit about success and what that means, but I like to say at the end is, pretend that you were sitting one-on-one, with someone just starting off in their career, and they asked you about success. What advice would you give that person about what success is and how to be successful?
Two questions. Question number one, what does success mean to you? You would feel like you were successful is what was true. Get them to list that. I make this much money. I'm having this kind of influence. I'm doing blah, 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 blah. I'm at this level of performance in a corporation or whatever. I don't know. That's their choice. What would success look like for you? 5 years from now, if you were highly successful, what would you look like? What would you be doing? At what level of game? Right. And then question number two, the most important question. What do you think that experience would give you? If you were there, how would that feel? What would be the experience you would have internally if you had that experience? Because if you can't answer number two, you'll never get to number one. And by the way, if you can answer number two, honestly, you can get there tomorrow. It's really true. It's like, wait a minute, we're after the red Porsche, we're after the big corporate thing, we're after being the CEO of a major tech company that made a big gazillion dollars. Wait, what do you think that's going to give you? A sense of accomplishment, a sense of control, a sense of contribution, a sense of clarity, a sense of ease and peace. And if it is, great. But how could you get a sense of control and contribution and peace tomorrow? Because if you're going to keep chasing, you're going to keep chasing the rabbit if you don't get to those things. And that's fine to go after those things. Just make sure you don't lose sight of what you want out of them.
Right. So it's the idea of a lot of people have a vision that what they want is the title, the money, the accolades. And associated with that vision is what does that person feel inside of them? This is what I hear you saying. But that feeling, you can get much quicker without having to attain the, monetary titles, all that kind of stuff. What do you have to do to get that?
Indeed. And those things might give you that. So don't stop. Why not?
Right.
Go for it. So I'm not saying go to the rice bowl and cave in a Tibetan cave.
Right.
I'm saying, hey, go for it. But be aware is that people want the red Porsche. They think this could give them freedom, could give them cool, they're going to look great, or whatever. They get the red Porsche and they're afraid about it's going to be dinged every night or stolen. And so they don't have a sense of freedom. So keep focused on what you want these experiences to bring you internally, and then have as many as you want. Just don't lose sight.
That's awesome. That's great. Thanks, David. That's super insightful. Like I said, I've got a lot personally to think after this podcast, but that's part of the reason I feel honored to do this and to have someone like you on here to share that, because just that whole conversation it's not a way that I've thought about. When I think about success, I do think about things like, I think it's natural to think about titles and monetary things. It's also, you want to think about, what contribution is. Like that's most important. But deconstructing it like you did, where it's more about how are you feeling in that moment, and can you attain that? You can attain that tomorrow. I mean, that's a lot to unpack and think about, but really, really insightful. Thanks, David. I appreciate it.